I was born in Budapest in July 1944. My parents were both Hungarian and they were married in March 1942. But Hungary was only invaded by the Nazis in March 1944. So at that time, life was relatively straightforward for them. But the Hungarians organised their own anti-Jewish legislation before the Germans arrived, and so my father was rounded up for forced labour by the Hungarian fascists. And this is terribly important because what happened to him really ruined his life. And it was done by his fellow countrymen. It wasn't done by the Germans. And he was sent to the Russian front and had a truly dreadful time, and very few of the young men came back. He did come back, but was very embittered by his experiences, and he wouldn't have any more children after the war. He said it wasn't a world to bring children to. And in fact, when I was 10 in 1955, he committed suicide. He'd had problems with his business, and because of what he'd experienced, he couldn't cope, and he was worried that they would send him to prison. And so that's what happened to him. Feel that his experiences as a forced labourer had a profound impact on the rest of his life. My mother was left in Budapest, and bizarrely, he was allowed home on leave, which was when I was conceived, apparently. And so she was pregnant when the Germans invaded. And in June 1944, she had to leave her home. They didn't own the flat. They rented it like most people did in those days on the continent. And she had to go to an area which, it wasn't yet the ghetto, but it was an area designated for Jewish women, and she didn't have any choice. And then she went to a special hospital to have me. She couldn't go to the ordinary maternity hospital. And sometime between when I was born in July 1944 and November 1944, when we were sent to the ghetto, she told me, but she didn't tell me very much. All she said was that she had to report the next day. And I don't know what she knew about what was going on, but of course the Nazis were deporting thousands and thousands of Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz. And she tried to leave me with her mother-in-law. Her own mother had already died, nothing to do with the war. But her mother-in-law said that she couldn't look after me because my mother was breastfeeding me and she wouldn't be able to feed me. So in the end, my mother had to go the next morning with me in her arms. And all she told me about it was, she said, the man in charge sent back the women with children. That's all I know. I don't know who the man was. I don't know whether he was a German Nazi, could have been a Hungarian Nazi, could have been a civil servant, he could have been a policeman. He could even have been a Jew, because the Nazis were very adept at getting the Jews to do their own dirty work. I've spoken about this all over the world. I've never found anyone who had a similar experience or has been able to offer me any explanation of why that happened. But had he not sent back the women with children, we would have been on the train to Auschwitz. As I said, I don't know how old I was, but I was just a few weeks or a few months old. Babies were thrown in the fire as soon as they arrived, so that would have been the end of me. And whether my mother would have been regarded as fit for work or not, I don't know. The irony is that if my grandmother had taken me, I probably would have died of starvation, and my mother probably would have died as well. So it's an extraordinary story, but for that man, I would not be alive today. And then in November, we were sent to the ghetto, and we were there until it was liberated by the Russians in January 1945. And my mother managed to breastfeed me still, even though she had very little to eat. There was very little food in the ghetto. It was desperately cold. Well, if you live in Berlin, you'll know that Hungary has very, very bad winters, and there was no heating or fuel. And also, to add to the excitement, the Arrow Cross, the Hungarian fascists, liked to take pot shots at the Jews in the ghetto. So it was a very dangerous place. And my mother's cousin, who used to live in Israel, told me that he found my mother when the ghetto was liberated, sitting on the stairs, holding me, surrounding dead bodies. Anyhow, she went back to the flat. I don't understand the logistics of it, whether somebody else had been living there, but anyhow, she went back there with me and was confronted by some Russian soldiers who arrived demanding food, and she explained that she didn't speak Russian, they didn't speak Hungarian, that she hadn't got any food. And so they went off and came back with a frozen animal, which she told me she thought was probably a dog, which somehow was cut up. And somehow my mother managed to cook it, and they all sat and ate it, because after all, when you don't have any food, you'll eat what's going. And she was very worried because she could hear a lot of noise, things being thrown out of windows, women being raped, and she was obviously worried whether they would hurt me. But they just peered at me. One man banged on his chest and said three, held up three fingers to indicate he had three children. And after they'd had something to eat, they lay down on the floor, went to sleep, and the next morning they pushed off. So that was my mother and the Russian soldiers, and she was determined to leave Hungary because of the anti-Semitism, and that's what they did in January 1946, which is probably about the time of the photo.